better understand what we can do to position our work to begin to address those things systematically, and how we can actually partner with other organizations to do it. So we're not doing this in isolation.
Mm-hmm.
We're really looking at the collective effort that needs to be in place to really see change happen.
So how is this different from the focus that you had?
Yeah. So what's not different is the main 4 targeted areas.
Mm-hmm.
So we are still focused on education, income or financial stability, health, and basic needs. What is different is our deeper focus in each of those strategies. So we know that to have successful outcomes, a lot of people think of United Way as kind of both the community fundraiser, but also somewhat a mile wide and an inch deep. So trying to get more focused, more targeted in terms of the strategies that we're using to affect that positive change and the measurement. So one of the things that you'll see consistently from United Way is a couple of things. One is 10 and 15-year goals on each of those targets. Mm-hmm. So long-term approach. We'll measure all along the way, annually, periodically, but also at the same time recognizing that we've got to continue to be more focused and deeper and work with our partners to be able to measure the outcomes, to know that we're making change or to know that we got to adjust those strategies because they're not having the impact we want.
Well, let's talk about that, because when you're working with those partners, those United Way agencies that are then, in the trenches, maybe a little deeper than United Way tends to be, just because they're sort of a fiduciary at times, but how do you affect their performance?
It's really helping them to also understand from our vantage point where they can best be suited within that equation to really do the best quality work that they can. Every nonprofit organization really gets into the game with the interest of helping people. And it's our job to really help them better understand how they can now maneuver their work to really begin to now address the real issues that families are experiencing and not necessarily their own assumption. Mm-hmm. I think we have a cadre of really very strong partners we work with who are very flexible, and that's a good thing because they're willing to learn along with us and they're willing to adapt to what we're seeing as being those changes happen. I think the other thing is really it's critical to understand that nonprofits play a special role in the lives of families, and we have a significant number of families that really depend on a strong nonprofit sector. So it's our responsibility to help strengthen that sector to the best way possible and make sure that those organizations really are deeply connected along with us to what those real issues are.
We're talking about the United Way with a renewed focus in Southwest Michigan. We'll come back in a moment with more on WBCK. Wednesday, we're here with Chris Sargent and Matt Lynn from the United Way. We're talking about what has been called a renewed focus on getting folks in the community what they need to be successful. What's the impetus here, gents? I mean, was it a recognition that we still have more work to do than maybe we were doing, or a greater work to do, or is this maybe something at the national level that's inspired you? How did this come about?
Well, it's not what it is it's looking at our local community, our regional community, both Battle Creek and Kalamazoo, and saying, so we are making progress in each of our 4 areas of education, income, health, and basic needs. At the same time, there's opportunities to do more and to do better. So it's more on a continuous improvement model. It's making sure that we don't get comfortable being okay. We don't get comfortable with good. We don't get comfortable with helping some families, but not all. And so it's a commitment, it's a passion. It's why we do this work, to say we can do better. Some of our indicators are changing in positive directions and others aren't.
So what isn't changing?
Well, when you look at overall things like graduation rates and our focus around health, infant mortality rates, and income, looking at the number of households that are financially stable, those types of things, overall, we're making some improvements in pockets, or we might be improving a percentage or two, but it's not always the dramatic change that we're looking for in terms of long-term that we want to see. And this new focus, deeper focus, greater impact around strategies is going to allow us to get there.
So as we talk about the impact on the community, then, how do you see that rubber meeting the road, Matt? How does that work?
I think it happens at a couple of different levels. I think the first, to Chris's point, when you talk about what's happening on the ground, and it's really looking at how are we doing the best we can for the families that are really affected by those goals. So when we talk about graduation rates, how are we really positioning, children to be on the pathway towards successful graduation, and how are we empowering families and parents to be able to be a guide along with the teachers along that pathway? When we talk about economic stability, how are we looking at what's happening within our neighborhoods where we have maybe higher number of houses that are either unoccupied or subject to rent and not home ownership, and start moving people more towards home ownership and establishing, kind of an equity base and assets for themselves. When we talk about health, another really strong factor, our goals are around infant mortality rates, but there's a much bigger avenue that we're really attacking, and that's looking at all the risk factors that happen from the time of conception to make sure that a family, once they find out they're pregnant, has the best pathway possible all the way leading up to a healthy birth. And then from that birth, how do we make sure that the home environment is conducive to healthy growth and development? And those are the real on-the-ground things. I think above that, you're talking about the systems that really impact the lives of families, and how can we make sure that we have systems that are equitable, for all people to gain access, and removing those barriers that would minimize the opportunities for people to access those support services.
United Way is here. We're talking about a renewed focus that they have on the work they're doing, and we'll pick up where we leave off in just a second. On Wednesday, we're talking with Chris Sargent and Matt Lynn from the United Way. So we've heard a broad description of what you're talking about in terms of a renewed focus here, but how do we articulate what that means for folks listening who might need to avail themselves of assistance?
Yeah. So what they should know, a couple of things is we didn't just do this in isolation when we created this. Hundreds of people in organizations, community conversations, where we talk to clients and customers that are actually receiving the support and services to be more self-sufficient and independent. And so what folks should know is that, not, as Matt talked about, we're improving the systems, but this is how it feels. It feels that, and should feel like, one, I can access services. So regardless of my background, regardless of my race, regardless of my gender, United Way is helping support with the network the ability for equitable systems. Economic and racial disparities are a central focus to the strategy. Mm-hmm. But they should also know that we're starting early. So we want to make sure that children are ready for kindergarten, children are reading proficient by third grade, they're getting good mentorship so that they can graduate high school on time. All along there, we're helping support, their good health and promoting that for children and families. But ultimately, to make sure the next generation has the skills so that they can get good paying jobs, so that they can have financially stable families. See, all of these four focus areas of education, income, health, basic needs are interconnected.
Sure.
So as we've talked before, children can't learn when they're hungry. So we got to be able to feed and also educate. And the other thing that's really critical, a lot of times we talk as United Way about raising money, and that's important. People still be able to give, right? ChangeTheStory.org, go hear the great stories, give to United Way as a part of your workplace campaign, those types of things. But equally important is getting people engaged. It's the volunteer engagement that's critical for this success, too. See, we can invest in great strategies, and we're excited about those, and we've got the right strategies. At the same time, we need people to show up. We need people to be reading buddies in the local schools to help children read proficient. We need them to be mentors through the Bigs in Business program and things like that. We need them to help people fill out free tax information annually so they get all the tax credits back. Those types of things are how people like you and I can get engaged every day, every month, once a year to really make a difference in our community.
What's the biggest encumbrance to doing what you're talking about, do you think? Or maybe it's hard to isolate one.
Well, it is, because these issues are so complex.
Yeah.
Right? I think one of the things to recognize is social issues of the day are not single issue focused. So a family that might be struggling is not struggling on one issue typically. They're struggling on multiple issues. What we're trying to do is get to the upstream strategies about how do we make an impact early on so that we don't have families struggling where they're at, and at the same time helping those families get to more self-sufficiency. One of the 3 or 4 critical things that we can help them with. Most of the time it's better skills for better jobs. It's making sure they have strong education and those types of things, financial stability through education and understanding how to do budgeting and those types of efforts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're talking about making an impact early on in a family that might already be in the throes of some of these challenges to which you refer, probably more than one. That's a gravitational pull you're working against, isn't it?
Yeah, from time to time, you're absolutely right. I think you asked an interesting question about what is it that also you're combating. And some of it's that apathy that exists.
Yeah,
it really
right.
is about where people have been in systems for so long or been part of a community where they feel like nothing's changed.
Mm-hmm.
And here we come as an organization really promoting something different. And it may be easy to turn and say, okay, here we go again. Here's another one that's not going to work. And it really is a belief that we're trying to instill, and hope, I think, is another big valuable word in that. And it's the hope that things can be different. And it's empowering people to really become the voice of change. Don't just expect one organization to really step up and then carve the path and then everybody follows. So as Chris talked about, really those key areas where people can get involved. Another one is around advocacy, really raising your voice. If you're not satisfied, with something, if you're not satisfied with the educational system, don't just sit back on your couch and complain. Talk to your educators, talk to your superintendents, let them know how you feel. If you're not satisfied with the conditions within your neighborhood, talk to your local legislator or work with us to help really create some advocacy as well. We're open and flexible. We love great ideas that come from neighborhoods and come from residents, and we're always open to listening as well to what it is that people have an interest in and where we can position ourselves to be supportive in that vein. We will do that.
You talked about the notion of apathy on the part of those who might be struggling and finding the motivation to continue to try and navigate that. I think you could extend that notion of apathy to what Chris said about looking for people to assist. There's probably people out there who could help who say, we're dealing with moochers or people who are just riding the gravy train. That's part of it too, isn't it? We've got to break through that.
Could be. We focus on the asset and the aspiration.
Right.
United Way knows that the people that we're supporting, the children and families that we care about deeply in our community, are actually trying to do better. And so, yeah, there might be a couple of people that are taking advantage of the system, but for the most part, that's actually a misnomer. That's not happening. And I'll give you another great example. On Monday, I read to a couple of third-grade students in one of the local elementaries here in Battle Creek. Anthony was struggling Monday. He'd had a bad weekend. I could just tell. He wasn't in a good mood. And so when I sit down to try to read with Anthony, I'm going to struggle too, unless I start and say, hey, you look nice today. Hey, I know you can do this. You actually are a really good reader. And all of a sudden, Anthony started reading. He put a smile on his face, and by the end of it, his attitude had changed because somebody in the community cared about his success. And that's how we're interconnected, too. We care about each other's success, and when we do that and show up, we make a difference.
Just a couple of words of encouragement broke that.
Absolutely.
That barrier. Yeah.
Most of the time, that's all it takes.
And your point is that any of us could be doing that.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Over 300 of us are every week right now
right.
on that example.
It could be 300 more, probably.
Absolutely.
I'm running out of time, but one of the notions that I've heard mentioned is when mission statements and things get changed, it's to help open up new funding avenues. Was that a thought here?
Well, not necessarily open up new funding avenues, but to make sure that the funding that we're doing is to the right partners having the right kind of outcomes. In our mission, there's really 3 key things. It's about driving impact. First and foremost, we're an impact-based organization. We want to change the community in positive ways. Secondly, it's shared leadership. So United Way alone, Matt and I as individuals, even though we're pretty smart guys,
right.
We're not going to just change the community tomorrow because of our 2 ideas. We're going to do that with other partners, other funders in the community, companies, individuals coming together to really make a difference. And to Matt's earlier point, it's about shared ideas. It's about making sure that we're engaging people, ideas, and resources to make a difference. ChangeTheStory.org, you can hear and see a lot of great success stories. So that invigorates us. That gets us excited about the impact that we're making. Yeah, we've got challenges that we have to face and that are, sometimes growing. but we know that we have the right strategy and structure and the right partners to make a difference.
And we'll leave it there. Chris Sargent, Matt Lynn, United Way. Check in whenever you like.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.
Appreciate the time today. 8:30.